The AFC West has a major problem. Nobody knows who's really in control anymore. Patrick Mahomes is coming off a major injury. The Broncos are coming off an AFC Championship run. The Chargers are running out of excuses, and the Raiders just handed the future of the franchise to a rookie quarterback. One season changed everything. The offseason raised even more questions. And now 4 teams walk into 2026 believing this division belongs to them. That's dangerous because reputations don't win games. Draft grades don't win games. And what happened last year doesn't guarantee a damn thing for this year. In the Wild Wild West, nobody is safe. AFC West draft grades. Hey, yo, where's my theme music?
Motion left to right, there's nothing there. Now he tries to run, breaks a tackle, dives for the end zone, fumbled the football, left sideline, midfield, 40, 30, 20, 10, touchdown!
Yeah, there we go!
Throws back of the end zone, there's C.D. Lamb!
Unbelievable!
We're back. You're listening to Football is Money on footballismoney.com. Here's your host. They call me boss.
All right, what's good, y'all? Welcome back to Football is Money. I am your host. They call me boss. And today we got another division to sort out, right? Every offseason, teams convince themselves that they found the missing piece. A draft class, a free agent signing, a coaching change. Sometimes that make them believe this year would be a little different, right? But then the game starts and reality takes over. So today we taking a hard look at the AFC West, not who won the headlines, not who won the offseason, but who actually put themselves in a better position moving forward. Now let's go to work. So before we get to the draft grades, let's take a look at how this division finished last season, right? Denver finished at the top at 14-3. The Chargers followed at 11-6. Kansas City dropped to 6-11, and the Raiders brought up the rear at 3-14. Now, that's important for one reason, because every team entered this offseason from a different position, right? Denver, they trying to stay at the top. The Chargers, they trying to take the next step. Kansas City is trying to get back, and the Raiders are trying just to get started, right? And that's why these draft classes matter. Not because everybody needed the same thing, but because everybody needed something different. Now let's see who helped themselves the most. Let's put the grades on the board. We got the Raiders, A-, Chiefs, A-, Broncos, A-, Chargers, B. Now let's look at that because 4 teams took 4 completely different approaches, right? The Raiders drafted a quarterback first overall. The Chiefs, they loaded up on defense. The Chargers, they made investments on both sides of the ball. The Broncos turned a first round and a second round pick into Jalen Waddle and additional depth pieces. 4 teams, 4 different paths, and somehow 3 of them landed on the exact same grade. And that's why draft grades only tell one part of the story. You know, the grades tell you what happened on the draft weekend. It doesn't tell you whether those moves actually solved the problem these teams was trying to fix. So let's start with the team holding the number 1 overall pick, and that's going to be the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders came away with an A-, and it all starts with Fernando Mendoza, quarterback out of Indiana. Number 1 overall pick. You know, the Raiders identified a guy and made him the face of this draft, right? Because at the end of the day, this entire draft is going to be judged by one question. Did they get the quarterback right? After Mendoza, the Raiders went to work on the rest of the roster. Let's see, they got Trayton Stoops, Kieran Crawford, Trey Zoon III, Jamal McCoy, Mike Washington Jr., and then more depth pieces throughout the secondary, defensive line, and receiver room, right? When I look at this draft, I don't see a team chasing headlines. I see a team trying to become more competitive. They added a quarterback. They added offensive line help. They added a running back. They added a receiver. And they invested heavily on the defensive side of the ball. And that tells me the Raiders understand exactly what they're doing. Because if you're going to compete with these teams at the top of the AFC West, you need more than one star player. You need a complete football team. And that's what this draft looks like, right? Not a shortcut, not a quick fix, a foundation with foundational pieces. Now, the other storyline here is Kirk Cousins, right? Because once again, Kirk Cole finds himself mentoring the quarterback that's expected to eventually replace him. And we've seen this storyline before. The only question now is timing. Does Kirk Cole keep the job all season? Or does Mendoza force the conversation sooner than expected? And the Football is Money read is simple. The Raiders got an A- because they addressed multiple needs. They strengthened both sides of the ball. And most importantly, they left this draft with a clear direction. The Raiders, they're not trying to win a division overnight. They're trying to become more competitive every Sunday. And this draft was a good place to start because the Raiders, they're not one player away from winning this division. They're trying to build a foundation that can eventually compete for it week in and week out. Now, let's talk fantasy football because obviously Fernando Mendoza is going to be the name everybody's going to watch. Quarterbacks taken first overall always create buzz, especially in dynasty leagues. But in redraft formats, I'm probably doing more monitoring than drafting right now. Another player I'll be watching is going to be Mike Washington Jr. If he starts climbing the depth chart during camp, he could become one of those deep league sleepers that nobody's seen coming. And don't completely ignore Malik Benson. You know, I'm not telling you to draft him right now. I'm telling you to watch him. Because every year, somebody comes out of nowhere and becomes fantasy relevant. For most redraft managers, this isn't a class that I am aggressively targeting. For dynasty managers in deeper leagues, though, there are definitely a few names worth watching. Now, the Raiders are building something. The Chiefs are trying to protect something. Now, let's talk about Kansas City. Because the Chiefs also came away with an A-. But this draft feels different from what the Raiders did. Like, the Raiders, they drafted like a team trying to build up. The Chiefs drafted like a team trying to stay who they already are. And when you look at the picks, that become pretty obvious. They got Mansour Delane, Peter Woods, Mason Thomas, Jaden Kennedy. And, you know, that's 4 of their first 4 picks that went to the defensive side of the ball. They got cornerback, defensive tackle, edge rusher, cornerback. So I don't believe that this was an accident. You know, they purposely went in to try to get these players. And that was the message. I believe the Chiefs looked at their roster and just came to the conclusion, like, you know, we like our offense. We like our system. We like our coaching staff. And, you know, we still believe in number 15. So instead of chasing splashy additions, they focused on strengthening the defense. And later in the draft, they added running back Emmett Johnson. They added receiver Cyrus Allen and quarterback Garrett Newsomere. But make no mistake about it, this draft was built around defense. You know, players that can get after the quarterback and create turnovers. They was building depth and making life difficult on opposing offenses. And honestly, I respect it because the Chiefs, I feel like they didn't panic. You know, they didn't spend premium draft capital looking for the next Patty Mahomes. They didn't overhaul the offense. They drafted like they fully expect Patrick Mahomes to be Patrick Mahomes. That's what I'm getting out of that. Now, the biggest question isn't whether Mahomes will be back this year. The question is whether he's still able to play like he's been playing. Because when you're coming off a major injury, being available and being yourself, like being 100%, it's not always the same thing. So if Mahomes looks and plays like Mahomes, Kansas City is right back in the middle of the AFC West race. But if there's rust, if it takes time, then the rest of the division suddenly has an opening, right? Just like last year. But look, there's one more piece of this puzzle that's worth mentioning, and that's Justin Fields. Because even if Mahomes is ready for week 1, Fields give the Chiefs something every contender needs, and that's insurance, that's depth, that's options, right? If he's called upon, he'll be playing in the best coaching environment of his career. And this is where we'll see what he's actually made of, right? So my football is money read, man. I understand the A-. The Chiefs stayed disciplined. They tightened up on the defense. They added depth. They drafted with confidence, not fear. And that's usually what strong organizations do. They don't overreact. They trust what they've built. Now, let's talk fantasy football. This draft is a little different because Kansas City went heavy on defense. So, if you're in IDP leagues, Mansour Delane, Peter Woods, Mason Thomas, and Jaden Kennedy are all names worth putting on your watch list. As for the offensive side of the ball, keep an eye on Emmett Johnson and Cyrus Allen during training camp. Now, I'm not telling you to draft them. I'm telling you to monitor them. Because every year, a rookie climbs the depth chart and catches fantasy managers sleeping, right? And that's really the lesson here. No rookie is off the table, but you also can't draft every rookie expecting them to become a star, right? The smart managers, they gather information first, then they make their move. The Chiefs are betting that their foundation is still strong. The Chargers are betting that their investment finally pays off. Now, let's talk about these Chargers, right? They came away with a B, the lowest grade in this division, but don't confuse the lowest grade with a bad draft, right? Because when I look at this class, I see a team with a very specific mission. Help the quarterback. Help Herbie, right? The first pick was the edge rusher, Akeem Mesidor out of Miami. After that, they turned their attention towards supporting their quarterback. They got a guard, Jake Slaughter, wide receiver, Brendan Thompson, tackle, Travis Burke, and later more offensive line help with Logan Taylor and Alex Harkey. So when you step back and look at this entire class, one word jumps out: support, protection, depth. Either one. Take one. Pick one. The Chargers understand something every successful organization eventually learns. Quarterbacks don't win by themselves. They need protection. They need weapons. They need coaching. And they need a roster capable of helping them succeed. And that's what the Chargers look like they did in this draft. A front office making sure his franchise quarterback has every opportunity to be successful. Because whether you high on Justin Herbert or not, one thing is clear. The Chargers have made their choice. They're all in. And if you're all in on the quarterback, your job is to put him in the best position possible. Now, here's where things get interesting. Because eventually help has to turn into results, right? Herbert, he has had the talent. He had opportunities. He's had multiple coaching staff. He's had people defending him. He's got people criticizing him. And at some point, all of that has to become just background noise. And the only thing left is winning. Not fantasy points, not highlight throws, wins, playoff wins, meaningful football in January. And that's why I think this draft is so important for the Chargers, because they looked at this roster and they was like, let's remove as many excuses as possible. Let's strengthen the O-line. Let's add another weapon. Let's improve our depth. Let's make sure our quarterback has everything he needs. Now, the pressure shifts because eventually the investment has to pay off. So I think the Chargers drafted with a purpose. I think they addressed real needs. And I think they continued investing in the most important player in that organization. So the question isn't whether Justin Herbert has help. The question is what happens now that he has even more of it, right? Now let's talk fantasy football. Because from a fantasy perspective, this feels more like a watch list draft class than a draft day draft class, right? Akeem Mesidor is definitely somebody IDP managers should be tracking. Brandon Thompson is another name worth monitoring in deeper leagues and dynasty formats. Then you got players like Genesis Smith and Nick Baird. Again, we're talking watch lists. We're talking training camp reports. We're talking preseason usage, not automatic fantasy starters. The deeper your league gets, the more valuable these conversations become. But for most fantasy managers, patience is probably the right play. Okay? And speaking of expectations, no teams enter this season carrying more momentum than the Denver Broncos. So let's go to the Mile High City and let's talk about the Broncos. The Broncos came away with an A-, but unlike the other teams that we discussed today, Denver entered this draft from a position of strength. Before this draft happened, the Broncos were already one of the best teams in football. I mean, they won the AFC West. They reached the AFC Championship game. And for the first time in a long time, they looked like a team with the real football foundation. New coach, new quarterback, whole new team built around that. And that's what makes this draft interesting because Denver, they wasn't trying to save his franchise. You know, they wasn't trying to find a quarterback. Denver wasn't trying to figure out who it wanted to be. They already answered those questions. Their focus this year was simple. How do we keep this thing going? Now, when people look at Denver's draft class, the first thing they notice is what wasn't there, a first-round pick. And that's because Denver, they had already spent it. The Broncos traded the 30th overall pick to Miami for Jalen Waddle. So when I evaluate this draft, I don't look at Denver as a team that skipped the first round. I mean, Jalen Waddle is their first-round selection. And, you know, I like the move because if you draft them near the bottom of the first round and you have an opportunity to acquire a proven playmaker, sometimes that's the better investment. So Denver chose certainty over projection, which a lot of us should always do. Then they traded out the second round too and picked up additional draft capital. I want to say an extra fourth, seventh round, something like that with Buffalo. And that's where the rest of this class starts to make sense. Because Denver, they wasn't chasing stars. They were building depth. They got Tyler Oyendem, I think that's how you say his name, Jonah Coleman, Cage Casey, Justin Jolly, Miles Scott, Red Murdoch, Dalen Bentley, different positions, different responsibilities, but one common goal, and that's reinforcements. So this draft wasn't about missing pieces. It was about taking the roster that's already working and making it stronger. More depth on the defensive line. You got more competition in the running game. You have more protection up front. You got more options at tight end. You got extra help in the secondary. Every move points back to the same question. How do we avoid taking a step backwards? Because getting to the AFC Championship is hard, right? Staying in that conversation is even harder. The moment you become a contender, everybody starts gunning for you. And that's where Denver finds itself at today. My football is money read, the A-. I like the Jalen Waddle move. I like the additional depth. And I like the discipline. The Broncos, they didn't draft like a team chasing a miracle. They drafted like a team trying to sustain success. And that's a big difference, my friend. Right? Because the Broncos are betting that last season was the beginning of something bigger. not the best season that they're going to have with their new head coach and quarterback. Now let's talk about fantasy football. If you're in deeper leagues or dynasty formats, again, there are a few names worth monitoring. Jonah Coleman at running back. IDP leagues, you got Tyler Oyden. What? Got some names on them. All right. Along with Miles Scott, Red Murdoch, and Dallin Bentley for IDP managers. So the key word here is monitor, not draft. Monitor, watch, keep an eye on. Because if you're playing redraft fantasy football, proven production usually wins championships. Now you can take a few upside swings, but you don't want a roster full of rookies and question marks. So pay attention to OTAs, pay attention to minicamp, pay attention to training camp, because information creates value. And the managers who stay informed usually have the advantage, right? So before we get to where the money at, I want to say something to all my new fantasy managers out there, especially the managers getting ready for the Football is Money Fantasy League for new managers. This is the time of year where championships start getting built. Not on draft day, not preseason, right now. So do your mock drafts. Learn how drafts flow. Learn where players are being selected. Learn how quickly positions dry up. And most importantly, learn to live football. Because if you don't know football, you're basically throwing darts in the dark. The more football you watch, the easier fantasy becomes. We'll keep you updated on the players, the trends, the sleepers, the breakouts. In a situation you need to monitor all season, but the managers who stay plugged in usually have the biggest advantage, right? Now, let's talk about where the money at. So we've looked at the draft grades. We've broken down every roster in this division. Now let's see where the money is at. You dig? And, when you look at the AFC West odds, one thing jumps off the page immediately. Kansas City, plus 160. Chargers, plus 190. Denver sits at plus 225. And the Raiders are way back at plus 2,000. So Vegas is telling us one thing, but Football is Money is about to tell you something different. So here's my AFC West power structure heading into the season. Number 1, I got the Broncos. Number 2, I got the Chiefs. Number 3, Chargers. 4, Raiders. Now let's talk about it. The reason I got Denver at number 1, the top spot, is simple. They solidified their team a little more. They won this division last year. They reached the championship game. And instead of getting comfortable, they added Jalen Waddle. They reinforced the rest of the roster. So until someone shows a clear leap, they're still going to be my number 1 team. Now, Kansas City comes in second. And honestly, if Patrick Mahomes looked anything like Patrick Mahomes and start in week 1, this ranking could change in a hurry. And that's why Vegas still has them as the favorite. Nobody forgotten who number 15 is. The question isn't who Patrick Mahomes is. The question is how quickly he becomes himself once again, because he had a major injury. And I don't expect him to come out at 100%, especially if he plays week 1. Because, if he's back to being Patrick Mahomes early in the season, this entire rankings changes, right? Just want to make sure that's clear. But anyway, 3rd, I got the Chargers. And this might be the toughest team in football to figure out. Every year the talent says contender. Every year the results leave you wanting more. So I like their draft. I like Herbie. But eventually potential has to become production. And until that happens, I can't really put them ahead of Kansas City, even though they was ahead of Kansas City last season. Number 4, we got the Raiders. I think they are better. I think they're headed in the right direction, but they're also asking the most questions. New quarterback, new direction, new coach, new expectations. And until we get some answers, 4th is where they belong, right? So if you look in the futures, division odds, and player props, remember this. The goal isn't picking the most popular team. The goal is finding value. Pay attention to injuries. Pay attention to quarterback play. Pay attention to the line movement, because the best opportunities usually show up before the rest of the market catches on. And right now, Football is Money says Denver Broncos are the team with the best value in the AFC West. Now, I want to hear from y'all. Your turn. You tell me who you got. Which AFC team are you buying heading into the 2026 season? Is it the Broncos, Chiefs, Chargers, or the Raiders? And tell me why, man. Who's winning the Wild Wild West? Drop your answer in the comments. Now let's close this thing out. The draft is over. The grades are in. Now it's time to prove it. 4 teams, 4 different paths, 1 division, 1 winner. That's what makes this division so interesting. Nobody's backing down, and nobody is safe in the Wild Wild West. The Raiders are trying to build a foundation. The Chiefs are trying to reclaim a throne. The Chargers are trying to justify the investments. And the Broncos are trying to prove last year wasn't a 1-year run. So somebody's about to be right and somebody's about to be disappointed. And that's why we watch. So if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, share it with another football fan, and don't forget to answer today's question. Who's winning the AFC West? And remember, for fantasy football leagues, article, podcasts, exclusive content, and more, visit footballismoney.com. I'm your host, they call me Boss. This is Football is Money. Thank you for watching, and we out. Run the outro, man.
That's a wrap. Thanks for listening to Football is Money. Find every episode and more at footballismoney.com.